Okay, so um, last night we went through the basics of setting some keyframes and how to adjust those keyframes and their timing and spacing in the graph editor. So I wanted to just go over that again kind of quickly, um, and just so you'll have something as a reference here. So again, we know that in the channel box here we have our translates, rotates, and scales, and we have that for X, Y, and Z. Right? And so you'll see that I can adjust those values here. We get a number there. As a quick note, some of you may know this already. If I click the word translate X and then go out here in the viewport and middle mouse click and drag from left to right, I can adjust that value. And I can do that with multiple values if I would like. Okay. So these are just values, right, on each of these channels, and so if I need to move it, forward 5 units in X, I can do that. Okay. Conversely, we also have the timeline. Maybe not conversely, but you know what I'm saying. Like as well, we have the timeline here, and this is just dividing up 1 second of animation into 24 slices, right? 24 frames. And so if we think of motion as simply animation as just a change over time, then we can start doing we can start setting markers to represent that change over time. Right? So we have this ball, and we can say on frame 1 at the beginning of time here, we want its translates and rotates to all be at 0. Okay, and so I can just set a marker on that by hitting the S key. And I guess S is for set keyframe. And so you see when I do that, we get a little marker there that says that's where our keyframe is. And over here we get all of our values turn red. And that means that we basically just set a marker on all of those values, right? And so now that value is being controlled by something. It's being controlled by a keyframe. And it can be controlled by other things. It can be controlled by constraints, or it can be controlled by a script, or it can be controlled by a whole bunch of different options inside of Maya. So this can turn different colors. Sometimes it'll turn yellow, sometimes it'll turn like a greenish color. But in this case, we're going to have it all turn red because we're driving it with keyframes, and so all of that should be red. Now let's say I wanted to so one of the annoying things is as you open Maya up, it probably looks like this, and this little key is not red. It's just a key. And so that means if I decide I want to set another marker in time, and I go out here to frame 24, and I say, I want to set a marker there, and that's where I want my pose to be for this, right? And then I scrub my timeline again, it just pops back. We didn't set a keyframe there. Now if I drag it out there and hit the S key, we will. But another option is to turn on this little red key here. And what this will do is it will set a marker in time for every channel that you change. Okay, so if I move my my value forward here, and I'm just moving it in my translate X, you'll see that it just automatically sets a keyframe when I let go of it. Okay, the thing about it is it only set a keyframe on translate X. It didn't set it on any of these other things. So if I go back later and decided that I wanted to make it bounce in the middle, right, and I set a keyframe there, well, that time I only set a keyframe on translate Y. So I have a keyframe on everything on frame 1, but on 12, it's transitioning from here to 12 on its translate X, or on its translate Y, and it's translating from 1 to 24 only on its translate X. So we get some different response. You see it changed what our keyframe on 24 looked like because we didn't nail everything down. Okay, so if I want to hit 0 there, that'll set a keyframe on Y, but if I just hit S on all of these, it will just nail all of the values down. Okay, and so it's kind of just like putting a marker on everything instead of just the one we changed. But it's a nice way of not losing your pose. So the auto key is nice to help you not like lose the pose if you've been working for a long time on a pose. So let's go ahead and make this kind of seem like 2 bounces. Let's see how far we went in the first one. That looks pretty good. And then again, about halfway there, I'll put another up pose, and I'm just keyframing it. Oops, see, I did it again. So that. Okay, and I'm actually using the greater than, less than keys to step back and forth through them. This is a shortcut. It's the period and the comma keys. Period will go forward, comma will go backward. And so this is a handy little tool to be able to sort of step through and see what your keyframes look like. So if we watch this now, let's get us a ground plane in there just so we can see it. Scale that up. I'll turn off my grid. Let's get this in here where it looks right. And we watch this. This is now our bouncing ball. Okay, and so Maya is automatically doing this transition for us, right? It's calculating how it's going to change from our keyframe on frame 1 to our keyframe on frame 12, right? And it's just going to do that in a very simple way. It's just going to kind of draw a it's going to draw a straight line through it. So don't really worry too much about what I'm using here. This is the grease pencil, which is a way of marking on your screen. But let's say if we were to graph out those values, right? Here's our keyframe on frame 1, and here's our keyframe on frame 12, and it's got a couple of different options on how it could get there. It could draw a straight line between them, and we can make it do that. Or what it's actually doing is it's drawing a straight line in the middle, right? But on each end, it's doing just a little bit of softening to make it, to sort of round it off, okay? And so this is what the curve for that looks like. And if we go to another point here, the reason it does that is so it can sort of smoothly go on into this point, right? So it's doing that, and let's go look at what that curve would look like. Okay, so if I select this sphere and I go to Windows, Animation Editor, Graph Editor, okay, you're going to see that it's going to bring up a graph of this. Another option for that is another option, way to bring up your graph editor is these little presets for your viewport settings here, right? So I can click this button, and what it will give me is my perspective on my top and my graph editor on the bottom. Now, I usually, depending on how you want to work, sometimes you'll keep your graph editor on one side and or on one screen and your viewport here on the other. And so that's maybe a nice way of working too, but this is just so we can see it for this video. And so in this video, you'll see that I can choose each of these channels. And so like anything that we would graph out, right, we have two values that we're measuring. We're measuring time as it goes left to right, and that makes sense because that's how our timeline slides, is left to right here. And we're measuring our value, the number that is in each of these channels, okay, as it goes from 0 to infinity or 0 to negative infinity. I don't know if negative infinity is really a real thing or not. And so you'll see that we have a graph for that for each of the translate XYZ, rotate XYZ, and scale XYZ, and visibility. So if I choose my translate X, sorry, I just have to click on it, not double click, you'll see that we have this graph. Now, it's not really able to see the change here as much. We can zoom in and out of this by holding down Alt and right-clicking, right, and that'll let us pull in and out. But if we use this button here, this blue Frame All button, or if we hit the F key, it will sort of resize it a little bit so we can see it. And so Translate X is our forward motion, and we can kind of see that now. We can see our ball is, the value in Translate X gets higher as we go across the screen, right? It starts at 0, it ends at 19,234, 19,234. So that's what we're seeing there, and you can actually see those values that this keyframe here is on frame 48, and its value is 19,234. So if we put those two things into a chart here, 48, 19,234, we can graph that point out. Okay. Now we can make changes to this. One of the changes we can make is it's really hard to select an individual keyframe. If you click it, sometimes you can select it, but if you slightly miss and select the curve, you just select the entire curve. Okay, so what I usually do, and this seems counterintuitive, is I just drag select to get that keyframe. Okay, click and drag, and that will highlight the keyframe that is within the marquee. Now if you do more than one, it'll get them both, but and if you just drag select with no key in it, it'll select the whole curve. But as long as there's one key in it, it will only select the key. Now, you'll see from here that there's also these little tangents, and so some people try to click on those, and sometimes you can, but again, you can also drag select that to select it. Now, all of these things we can move if we want to, but you'll see that if you just do a regular mouse click and drag, it's just selecting, right? So to move them, we actually have to use the middle click, so which is the mouse wheel. You just press down the mouse wheel. So as you see, I'm getting this button here. It's not letting me move it. And the reason for that is because I'm still in the selection tool. I have to be in the move tool. So I'm going to hit W to go to the move tool. See that I can move it around. I can also scale it. So if I hit R and I click somewhere here, I can scale that point. But that's maybe, that's a little bit more advanced on how we would edit some stuff. But just know that that's a possibility. So we have this this key selected. We can move it. So if we don't want it to go as far, let's say we drag this down here, and it goes all the way through to frame 36, but then it turns around and goes in the other direction, right? So we can change the animation just by adjusting these curves. Now, we can also change some other things. Like if we look here, see how the ball kind of slows its forward progression as it gets to right there? It doesn't like hit it very fast. Some of that is because of the way this eases in here. You see how if we were to look at this graph, and I'll amplify it in one angle here, you'll see as we get closer to 48, the distance from, so like on the distance on frame 41 and 42, the value changes, pretty big. It's almost like a half of a number, right? It goes like from probably like 17 and a half to 18, right? Whereas from 47 to 48, it doesn't change very much at all. So that change in the value starts to slow down, and so we get this ease into the curve, or we get this ease into this point. And so when talking in terms of timing and spacing, that means the spacing of that movement from left to right is getting smaller, right? It like from 41 or 40 to 41 again, or no, this is 41 to 42. That's a big jump in spacing. From 47 to 48, that's not a very big jump forward. That's not a very big jump in spacing. So we can change that. We can grab this tangent here, and we can adjust it and make the spacing bigger if we wanted. Okay, so we can do a whole bunch of this stuff just to kind of smooth out this curve and make it work the way we want to. So these are just very slight changes we can make as an animator that really precisely controls our animation. Gives us the power to do whatever we want to with the animation, not just whatever Maya decides to do with it. So if we do that, then it feels much more like a constant forward progression, like it's never going to stop. You can see at the end it feels like it's going to keep going forward. So this feels right now kind of like a sine wave, and in fact if we were to track that, that's pretty much what is happening there, is a sine wave forward. Now let's go to translate Y. That's our up and down, and we're going to talk about, as the video we watched about timing and spacing said, that your up and down motion, or your timing and spacing, is going to tell you, of your up and down motion, is going to tell you something about the ball, right? So let's look at this. If we if we see it now, this could be anything. It's just a sine wave. It's almost like a mathematical function. And we don't really see things move like this very much, except maybe machines, right? So like we don't see bouncing balls do this. We don't see, you know, a lot of things do this. I mean, we see it, you know, in other areas. Maybe a fish swimming up and down may move in a sine wave. But this doesn't feel like it's bouncing or being affected by any forces outside of itself, right? It doesn't really feel like it's bouncing off the ground here. And the reason for that is, again, we look at the change from frame 18 to, let's see, 18 to 19 here, and it changes a big amount. It's almost a whole value, a whole number there. Whereas from 23 to 24, there's barely any change at all. It's like a tenth of a value, right? So it's slowing down right before it gets to the floor, okay? Which, if you've ever jumped off of something, you realize is not possible, because you're going to start falling faster and faster and faster until you reach a constant speed of fall, which is called terminal velocity. And so you're going to continue to accelerate how fast you fall until you hit something, or until some external force changes that. Okay, so right now it feels like it slows down just because he's getting close to the ground, or just because it's getting close to the ground. And we don't want that. We want it to feel like it just slams into it. Okay, so we don't want this ease in. We want it to be going really fast as it comes down through. We want a big gap in it, a big gap in the spacing, or how much it changes. So I could make that happen, right? I could grab this tangent and I could twist it, and we go, now that's a big space as it goes into this point here. Like it's going a whole value right toward the end, and if we watch it as it's coming in, watch the ball, you'll see that it's jumping a big distance, right? Problem is it keeps going and it goes to the floor. So what we need is a way to change this tangent's angle here without changing the other, like they're kind of locked together. So what we want is to be able to break this tangent. So if I grab that keyframe and I click this button here, I don't even really, it's like a white tangent bar and a red tangent bar pointing in a V. And so if I click that, you'll see that the tangents change colors. Okay, and so now we know one's blue, one's purple. And if I grab them now, again, use the middle mouse click to move them, I can adjust them to do something like that. Same with the end. I could adjust that whole thing because there's nothing coming before or after it, or I could go ahead and break it just for cleanliness reasons and get something going on like this. Right? And so now if I watch this animation, right, it kind of feels more like it's bouncing off the floor now. So this is your job as an animator, to control this. And here's the thing. Most of you are going to hate the graph editor from the very start. You're going to think of it as like this annoying thing that's going to make you think of numbers and values and math and try to decipher what the graph means. And you're just going to hate it. You're like, it's not, you know, most people don't find it very fun. And that doesn't mean that it isn't fun, but most people don't find it that fun. And you're going to have to get past that, and it's a band-aid we have to rip off and get comfortable with. And that's kind of what my job is to try to help you do that. So don't worry, I got plans for this. I understand you're not going to enjoy using the graph editor for a little while here, but we will make it to a point to where you do. So again, we can adjust this graph editor to tell us different stories about this ball. And so, as we mentioned again in class, right now, the story it's telling us is that it's a bouncing ball, that gravity is pulling on it, and it's bouncing on the floor, right? But we could do something as simple as just lower and change the distance between these two. So make this a really small, short bounce, right? I have to adjust my tangents a little bit to make that happen, right? And what we get is a little bit of a different ball then, right? It feels a little heavier now. So So these are things that we can control with a graph editor, and we have a lot of control over that. Let me undo that and get us back to where we were. So let's say we want to tell a drastically different story about this bulb. Let's say we want to tell the story of it hitting the ceiling. Right. Instead, that it's a helium balloon that's going to bounce off the ceiling. Okay. So let's just look at that, because right now what it's doing is it's kind of getting close to that, right? And we could start by having it hit the ceiling on both of them. We could shift our curve up there, and it hits the ceiling on both of them. But it's still not telling that story. It still feels like it's bouncing off the ground just by the way it moves, right? Because it's got those sharp hits on the bottom. And so we can change that by making those sharper hits feel like they're ricocheting off the top. So I'm just going to go in here, set all these back to automatic. Right? Instead, I'm going to break these tangents. So if I break that, angle it like this, right? Then maybe now it'll feel like a helium balloon bouncing off the ceiling. And again, we can make these smaller. We can do all sorts of little things to this. In fact, we can actually even add additional keyframes in here. Now, this is a little bit more advanced, and we'll get into more of this later. But let's say I want it to feel like it kind of just putters around on the top of the ceiling and makes a couple of little bitty bounces. Right, so maybe I want it to hit the ground right there again. I can even go to Keys and the Add Key tool, and if I middle mouse click here and drag, I can insert a new key. I can insert one here to give it a high point as well. Okay, and I'm going to break some tangents here real quick. I want to break this one, not the other one, but that'll work. Right. And then I could even do, if I wanted to do it again, add another little bitty one here. Just a little one. And so by doing that, I get a lot of control over how this animation looks. So if that's what I'm wanting it to feel like, it's just a couple of changes to the curves to make that happen. So I know I know the graph editor is frustrating. I know that it's one of those things that doesn't feel very inviting, but just keep working at it a little bit, and hopefully this first project will give you a little bit more confidence in that, and then we will continue digging into it a little deeper, and I think you'll feel a little bit better about it. So let me know if you have any questions, and thanks for watching. Bye.